reminder, I think most, if not everybody that's here tonight was here this morning. But do want to remind you that from the grief seminar yesterday that we did pick up some books, and there are some extra copies in there. But actually after services, if you want to look at these two or the ones that are in the WBS room on the table, you can look through and see some of the content. And we did get 10 copies of each, is that right? Okay, so just let us know if you're interested in taking a copy for yourself, because we want to make sure that we keep track of how many we got and all of that. But the first book is Walking with Those Who Weep. So again, as I said, that's more for if you have a loved one that is grieving, that you would like to know how to comfort them and just everything having to do with how to treat them or understand them more so. That's what that looks for. And then Hope for Those Who Struggle, again, is for those of you who are in the grieving process. And so two wonderfully excellent books for us to look at and consider and to learn from. We are continuing our study in Peter's epistles, and we are in 1 Peter chapter 2. And this is not going to be, as they say, a complete exegesis of the book, but tonight's sermon is going to be taken completely from 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 1. So we're going to be focusing on one main verse. But the title of my lesson tonight is 5 Things to Put Away. 5 things to put away from the life of a Christian. You know, being a Christian obviously means that we are to be different from the rest of the world. Oftentimes our biggest struggle is we don't know how to be different. We don't know what it means to be different. We don't necessarily know everything there is to know about what is right and what is wrong, especially situationally, whenever we get in one situation to another. Sometimes that's a very difficult thing, and we don't really know the rights and wrongs of it until we've kind of already been through it. But the Bible does give us some great instruction before we have to experience some things, before we have to go through some things, to help us to understand what it is that we need to do in order to be pleasing to God. But as a Christian, our attitude and our mindset are also to be changed, along with our actions. And so that really is the driving force of how we are going to live and what we are going to do within our daily lives. It all starts here, doesn't it? It all starts here. And of course I mean that figuratively. That it starts inside us on how we're going to change and the things that we are going to change about ourselves. So we must put some things away. We must get rid of some things in our life, or we won't have a beneficial faith, will we? We won't have a faith that actually goes anywhere, that actually does anything. But I want us to think about that statement for just a second. The idea of to put something away. You know, whenever I think of, I'm going to put this away, most of the time what I mean by that is I'm going to put this away for now while I'm not using it, but when it's time to use it again, I'm going to get it back out again, right? That's kind of what we do whenever we put stuff away. Whenever we're straightening up the house, that's what we do. You know, when we tell our kids, put your toys away, we're not telling them to never get those toys out again, are we? We expect that probably the next day that those toys will be out all over again, or, you know, within the next week or whatever. And so that's in our daily context, that's what it means to put things away. But in the biblical context, it actually means something very different. It means to put away or to put away from. and to not go near it again, or to not get it out again. To put it away for good, or to put it off, to push it off. And folks, isn't that what we need to do with sin? Isn't that what we need to do with sinful attitudes? I think we'd all agree that that is what we need to do. But here's our passage for tonight. 1 Peter 2 and verse 1. So put away all malice and all deceit and hypocrisy and envy and all slander. Now, the way that we're going to approach this sermon tonight, the word all is going to be in front of every word that's mentioned here. Put away all malice, all deceit, all hypocrisy, all envy, and all slander. Because that word all is extremely important. You know, we've been told plenty of times, and we know that the Bible tells us that if we are going to live pure and righteous life, we even need to get rid of even the very appearance of evil, don't we? We don't want to tread closely to it. We want to stay as far away from evil things and bad things as we can. And that's how we can guarantee that we can be pleasing to God. And I know that we slip up every now and then. I know that we fail every now and then. But when we do fail and when we do realize that we are in a state of failure, then that means we need to pick up the pieces. We need to get back where God wants us. And so we need to put all of these things away that we've been asked to put away. But as we read this passage, put away all malice, all deceit, hypocrisy, envy, and all slander, I want us to understand the context of this passage. And you need to go backwards a little bit for the context. You'll notice that in 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 1, what is the very first word? At least in the ESV, which I was reading from, the very first word there is so. So, put these things away. What does that mean? Well, whenever you see that written in a biblical context, that means that you are reading a continuing thought, doesn't it? Even though this has gone into a whole new chapter, you know, we've gone from chapter 1 to chapter 2, it says, so put these things away. And so basically what that means, folks, is because of this, or since this is the case, here is what you need to do. And that's what it means when it says so. So what's it talking about? Because of what? Because of what? For what reason are we supposed to put these things away? 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 23, I believe, gives us a one-verse answer to that question. Here Peter states, since you have been born again, not of perishable seed, but of imperishable, through the living and abiding word of God. You know, Peter, this is one of the passages where Peter starts talking about living as living stones. And living lives of purity and righteousness. But he says, because you've been born again. You've been born again. And you are part of an imperishable seed. You are a seed of Abraham now. You basically are a seed of God. You are a child of God. And because you're a child of God, here are some things that you need to put away. So I want to go through the list and just briefly talk about each one of these things that we have been asked to put away from us. The first one is put away all malice. Now, malice isn't necessarily a word that we use every day in our language, but I think we get the gist of what it means when we are malicious toward someone. We know that that basically is an evil action toward somebody. And this idea of malice is basically having ill will towards someone, but that follows with, oftentimes, the desire for injury. You have such an ill will towards somebody that you wish ill will upon them. You have this hope that maybe something happens to them. And don't we do that oftentimes just whenever we see people doing things to others that might hurt them or hurt their feelings, or maybe they do something to make you mad. You know, we do this with road rage all the time, don't we? Like a couple weeks ago in Jasper, I had a guy, literally, I was at a stoplight. I had a guy in a pickup truck zoom past me in the center lane, not the side lane, which is passable in Jasper. That was a new rule I learned, when I moved here. That you can zoom around people on the right side, and that's no problem when they're turning left. Well, I was going to go straight. We still had a red light. This guy went into the middle lane and then just zoomed past everybody. And it's like he timed it just right, because when he started going, and by the time he hit the light, it turned green, and he just went past everybody. You know what my first thought was, honestly? I hope there's a cop up ahead. I hope that guy gets caught. And, I might have even had some other thoughts like, I hope he hits a pole or something. No, yeah. But, I hope that a cop gets him or something. That was just wrong, and that was dangerous. He could have hurt somebody, right here. But we automatically sometimes have this thought of, well, since he could have hurt somebody, I hope he gets hurt in some way. That's kind of our human nature to do that. So we have these malicious thoughts sometimes that pop into our mind, especially in very tense situations. But I think that God, for his children, would even want us, as his children, in very tense situations, to still be his children and to still have the mindset of his child, that we cannot be malicious toward other people. Let me kind of give you an example of the thought process or the idea of maliciousness in the Bible. Like you have an example in Psalm 41 and verse 5 where David, and we often go to David's Psalms whenever we think about our enemies and how our enemies feel about us and how we might feel about them. And David does a really good job of describing and addressing this. But in verse 5, David says, "My enemies say of me in malice, when will he die, and his name perish?" David had quite a few people that wanted to see him fall, wanted to see him fail, wanted to see his kingdom fail. And they would say as much. They would say as much to where David knew about it. Some of these enemies were actually even within his own court. Whenever we think about the times where even David's own sons would try to overthrow him, would try to take over his throne. Some of his own kids were his enemy, and they were malicious toward him. They wanted these bad things to happen to him. I can also think of Joseph in the book of Genesis. Whenever you think about Joseph, whenever he went to his father, actually he went to his brothers also and told them about the dream that he had. That one day all of his brothers were going to bow down and serve him. Well, this was a prophetic dream that he had, but his brothers didn't like what they heard, did they? So what did they do? They went and they threw him in a pit and ended up selling him to Potiphar, and then they put blood all over his clothes and took him to his dad so that his dad would assume that he had been killed and would basically move on and forget about him and not try to look for him anymore. And then you think about all the different trials and things like that Joseph went through because of what his brothers did. But I want you to see the observation that Joseph makes about this whole situation. Genesis 50 and verse 26. He's addressing his brothers after he finally reveals to them who he is. And of course, they're in absolute shock. He says, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." You know what he's saying to his brothers? He's saying, if you all would have never had these malicious thoughts and these malicious actions against me, then I wouldn't have been here, second in command to Pharaoh, to save an entire people from famine. So in a sense, he's sort of telling his brothers, thank you. But what he's doing there is he's addressing the fact that you guys did mean this maliciously. You wanted me to fail. You wanted me to die. But folks, we cannot be malicious toward others if we are going to wear the name of Christ and if we're going to have the heart of Christ. The good thing is that when people are malicious towards us, sometimes it does work out the same way that it did with Joseph. That we find a way to make the good out of things. And we glorify God with those things. But it's not something for us to do toward other people. The love of Christ doesn't coexist with malice. 1 Corinthians 13 and verse 6 says, "Love does not rejoice at wrongdoing." And I look at this two ways. I think we should never wish for others to be wrong, and we should never wish for others to do wrong. We should never wish for someone to do something evil that would risk their soul going to hell. Oftentimes we have that attitude. Joseph could have had that attitude toward his brothers, thinking about all the things that he went through, but he didn't. Put away all malice. Number two, the passage tells us to put away all deceit. Now, what is deceit? Obviously, deceit is a derivative or a simile to deceive. So to deceive is to lie. Okay? It's one form of lying. That's what I want us to understand. All right? I understand the concept of lying, but deceit is a form of it. Whereas deceit is to lie in such a way to lead on or to steer somebody in the opposite direction. Okay? And so the purpose behind what you're doing, to lead someone on, to make them think something, and oftentimes we can deceive without even saying a word. That's the power of deceit. But I want us to just look at what Solomon wrote in Proverbs 26, 24 through 26. "Whoever hates disguises himself with his lips and harbors deceit in his heart. When he speaks graciously, believe him not, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. Though his hatred be covered with deception, his wickedness will be exposed in the assembly." God tells us to put away all deceit, all lying. And one of the things that he makes us understand is that you can't hide deceit forever. You can't hide lies forever. Eventually, they will come out. And the question is, in all of this, would you rather those things come out on the day of judgment? Or would you rather come to honesty here and bring all those things to light that you need to bring to light? Put away all deceit. Quit deceiving yourself and quit deceiving others. It's not going to do you or anyone else any good. Number 3, along with deceit, I would say, goes hand in hand with it, put away all hypocrisy. Put away all hypocrisy. Now, this is a big one because this is one that a lot of people have issues with. Not necessarily personally that they are a hypocrite, but they think everybody else is a hypocrite, right? Well, I don't want to go to that church, they're all hypocrites. Or, this person is not who he says he is. I think we do need to be who we say we are. Most definitely. But oftentimes we try to put that off on everybody else too, without really trying to make sure that we're not in the same boat. But what is hypocrisy? Hypocrisy is basically acting like somebody that you are not. Again, it comes from the Greek word for actor or performer. To be a hypocrite was to be an actor, to be able to play a part. And that's considered to be quite a talent. It's considered to be quite a talent in our society, isn't it? We basically worship people that can lie for a living. We worship people that can, on a screen or on a stage, be somebody that they actually are not. It takes a lot of talent to be able to do that. And in the same way is true in our everyday life. It takes a whole lot of talent to convince people that you are somebody that you're not, doesn't it? I was telling Joyce and Kim yesterday in the car that I said the good thing for my parents, especially as a kid, I was a horrible liar. So I didn't get away with a whole lot of stuff. That's something I was not good at, because if I did try to lie, I looked guilty like that. I couldn't handle the guilt. But whenever we are hypocrites, we become so desensitized to trying to live that fake life that it just about doesn't affect us anymore. Hypocrisy is a false identity for Christianity. That's exactly what it is. And I want you to really focus in on this scripture where Jesus is talking to some scribes and Pharisees. Some scribes and Pharisees that would brag about their knowledge of the law and even try to convince everybody that they kept the law very well, which in reality they did not. But here's what he says, Matthew 23 and verse 27. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! For you're like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanliness. Now, what is Jesus saying here? Basically, what he's saying is that you give off the perception that you have no spot or blemish, that you're clean as a whistle, but inside you're as dirty as can be. And the illustration there is a whitewashed tomb. Basically, is a brand new tomb that it looks like has just been carved out of rock. Just been established. And someone has just been laid to rest inside of it. He said that's deceptive because what's really inside is just bones. That body's been there for a while. Okay? He translates that over to what's on the outside is completely deceptive to what is on the inside. And so this is kind of an examination of your own heart. Put away all hypocrisy. And just think about yourself. Evaluate yourself. Have you done that? Have you put all hypocrisy away from your life as you have obeyed the gospel and as you have decided to become a child of God. Romans 2 and verse 3. I love how through a lot of the book of Romans, how Paul is asking rhetorical questions, pretty much. He always says, do you think, or do you suppose? Do you really think that it's like this? And of course, a lot of these letters, a lot of these epistles, was Paul answering questions that some of these churches had. But here's what he says. Do you suppose, O man, you who judge those who practice such things, and that yet you do them yourself, that you will escape the judgment of God? In some of his later chapters, in chapter 6, he says things like, may it never be. And if you think about it in this passage, do you really think that you're going to go to heaven just because you act like you don't do these things when you do? And then you, as we talked about last week, divert all the attention to that other person? He says that doesn't work that way. God's going to uncover all of that. So you can't accomplish anything as a Christian just by hiding things. You've got to be who you say you are. And if you're a sinner, if you're still caught up in sin, you need to say who you are. You need to confess that stuff. That's the gist of what's being said here. Number 4, we're told to put away all envy. What is envy? Well, envy, isn't it kind of like covetousness? That you're kind of jealous. Somebody else has something that you want, or they're the type of person that you wish that you were. They have the things that you wish they had, so you desire those things. Envy is more like a jealous spite, okay? More than just covetousness. You spite the person. You hate the person because of who they are or what they have. That's really the gist of envy and how deep envy goes. You spite them. Just their existence bothers you. And it gets to you. It cuts to you. Funny thing is them existing, that wasn't our doing. And, that's not on us. We can't control that, or we shouldn't try to control that. But it's like what was said a while ago. It's like wishing evil on someone. Not because they made us mad, not because they did something evil to us, but because we are jealous. Because we're jealous of them. Matthew 27 is another situation where we look at Jesus. And you know what realization Pilate came to whenever they had Jesus on trial with him, and he was supposed to make the decision on whether or not to release Barabbas or to release Jesus. And of course later on he had to make the ultimate decision on, do we go ahead and sacrifice Jesus or not? Pilate could read these Jewish people like a book. He knew what was in their heart. As a matter of fact, in chapter 27 of Matthew, in verse 18, Pilate knew that it was out of the envy that the people had that they delivered Jesus up to be crucified. He thought it was the silliest thing in the world that they wanted to release Barabbas. But he said, these people envy him. They envy him. And they want him dead for it. Philippians 2, verses 3 through 4. Here's what Paul tells the Philippians about the heart of envy. Do nothing from rivalry or conceit, but in humility count others more significant than yourselves. Let each of you look not only to his own interest, but also to the interest of others. Folks, whenever we have envy in our hearts, whenever the status of another person makes us jealous, and it's this jealous vitriol, that's us being selfish. That's us thinking that we deserve more than what we got. That's us thinking that we deserve more than that other person. That's us basically practicing a rivalry with somebody else. We have this rivalry. And you know what? People do this with their neighbors all the time. That's what the whole idea of keeping up with the Joneses is all about. Our neighbor gets something, gets a new toy, a new yard toy or something, so we think we've got to have it in order to keep up with them because we have this jealous envy. It's not fair that they have those things and we don't. And that's what that is. This is jealous spite. And so we want to one-up them. We want to outdo them. He says, you know what? Don't just look to your own interest. Look to the interest of others, no matter who they are. Look to see what you can do for them. Get rid of this envy. And lastly tonight, we're told to put away all slander. Slander means basically to be a talebearer. You like to tell tales on people because you like to make sure that somebody else has a worse reputation than you do. Or you want to heighten your reputation by lowering someone else's. And so you say mean things about someone. Maybe you take something bad that they have done in their past, and even if they have been forgiven of those things, even if they have made those things right, you still put it out there because you want to smear their name. Folks, this is the worst thing about politics, isn't it? Politics is full of slander. And the worst part is they'll dig up things from 15 years ago that I don't want to know anything about when it comes to that person. They'll even try to destroy that person's marriage in the middle of the campaign, bringing up things that supposedly happened in the past to just absolutely destroy them and destroy their character. Folks, we can do that on a personal level too, to the people around us. Slanderers falsify things to make others look bad. We don't want to be put in that category. Proverbs 10:18. The one who conceals hatred has lying lips, and whoever utters slander is a fool. The proverb writer writes. Titus 3:2 tells us to speak evil of no one. Y'all notice that? It doesn't say, hey, make sure you don't speak evil of everyone, just some. Well, this passage says, speak evil of no one. To avoid quarreling, to be gentle, and to show perfect courtesy toward, here's this all word again, toward all people. Toward all people. Even those people you're running against. Even those people you disagree with. That doesn't mean you have to quarrel with them if you disagree with them. Doesn't mean you have to make things up about them just to make them look bad. Folks, you know what? Whenever we resort to slander, you know what that tells me in politics? It tells me that they don't have enough on policy alone to win against that other person. That's what it tells me. What it also tells me about the Christian is that whenever we don't get along with somebody but we resort to slander, that means we don't have an argument to stand on. Whenever we resort to character defamation, Christians should not act that way and should not be that way. After all, Matthew 12, verse 36 tells us this. It's not Matthew that tells us this, it's Jesus that tells us this. That we will all give an account for every evil word that we speak against others. Can you imagine that, y'all? That whenever we face the Lord in judgment, I don't know if he's going to have a file cabinet. I don't know if he's going to have a laptop or whatever. But he's going to have some sort of documentation. He's going to look there and he said, now, Ryan, on this date, what you said about this person was absolutely evil. It did not represent me whatsoever. Why did you do that? Is that going to be us on the day of judgment? That's what we need to understand. Those things that we've done that we haven't sought forgiveness on, that we haven't really cared to, that we just didn't care that we said those things about people. We're going to be held accountable for those things, and we need to understand that. Put away all slander. Folks, putting these things away is going to show that Christ is in you. That you filled yourself with Christ. You put those things out. Fill yourself with Christ. Ephesians 31 and 32, says, let all, there's that word again, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you. Now, that's the kick in the face right there, isn't it? Put all these things away. Get rid of all these things. You know why? Because Jesus forgave you for every single one of those things. You've got to forgive others, and you've got to put these other things off, because Jesus, first of all, gave you an out with all of this stuff that you've done. Give mercy if you understand that Jesus gave you mercy first. It's the idea here. This passage indicates the distance that a sinful heart should be away from each and every one of us. We should have no guile toward others. We should love others, and we should treat others as the creation of God. Tonight I want to offer the invitation and examine your heart. That's what I want you to do tonight. Examine your heart. Where is it when it comes to your relationship with other people? Have you treated people with the same love that Jesus has treated you? If you haven't, then you're walking down a road that's not going to lead to Christ. And you need to get back on that road with Him. So as we offer this invitation, if you need to be restored, or if you need prayers of the congregation to have that better attitude, to have that better heart, we want to help you do that. If you need to do that, please come as we stand and as we sing.